In the last episode, I promised to give you an update on how my talk at Plymouth University went. I'm happy to say it went really well. Man, I was still pretty terrified. I think I always will be, but I've definitely noticed a difference in the level of fear, um, and just my general ability to cope with it. What was nice was that my friend Katie met me in Plymouth, took me to the university. So I had a friend with me, so I wasn't sort of stressed about finding the place. And I was really early. We had loads of time, and the people there were so nice. The faculty members that sort of organised the event, the illustration event that I was part of, were brilliant. I was there for kind of the whole day, and they sort of took really good care of me. Lots of coffee and tea and snacks and food. And it was actually nice to be there for the full length of the event. I mean, it meant that it was an incredibly long day for me, a bit crazy, in fact, because Plymouth is a long way from London. It was quite surreal. I mean, it was pitch black and raining when I got up, got to Paddington. It was freezing cold in there. It's all kind of like open to the air. So I had to hunt around for a cafe that was kind of had a door that I could sit inside in and kind of try and warm up. There were quite a few homeless people around, which made me kind of sad to think about people who probably head to the first public building that opens, as early as possible in the morning to try and get warm. But I sat in there and I had some coffee and I watched a show on my iPhone. And then when we went to board the train, and they were having major technical problems with the train, so we ended up leaving quite late. That was a bit stressful. But when I got there, it was really nice. Everyone kind of took care of me. I was the second speaker to talk. The first was Ben Newman, who's published a lot of books with No Brow Press, a lot of children's books with them. His talk was great. He's a really practiced speaker. I think he'd given the talk a lot of times before, and I kind of picked up some tips for if I ever do such a long talk in the future from watching him. He had some video incorporated into his PowerPoint presentation, which I thought was a brilliant idea, because every time he played a video clip, he was able to have a break from speaking for, a few seconds. So that's something I would think about doing in the future myself, if I ever did one this long again. So that was great. Then I did my talk, and actually there was kind of a funny moment. The fire alarm in the university went off halfway through my talk, but in actual fact, at that point I was struggling. I was kind of, I don't know, when I talk non-stop, I start to get kind of a bit breathless. My voice starts to go quite quickly. It starts getting really croaky, and that makes me panic a bit because I start to become aware of it. And I was just reaching that point of thinking, how am I going to get through this, when the fire alarm rang and we all had to go and stand on the pavement. And people kept apologising to me, and I was kind of like, no, this is fine. I'm really happy to have this. I had sort of 10 minutes to just drink some water and then calm down. And then when I got back in, I kind of felt good, because the scariest part of actually starting was over and I was warmed up and I just carried on. And it seemed to go really well. I actually really enjoyed it. And by the end, when we did some sort of questions from the students, by that point I was really relaxed, even though I was still speaking in front of an audience. After me, there was Dan Franklin, from recently retired from Jonathan Cape, who gave a talk about his long career in publishing graphic novels. And it was kind of astounding to hear, I mean, just how many classics that he's responsible for sort of publishing in this country. I mean, people like Chris Ware, Dan Clowes, Charles Burns, Alison Bechdel, Raymond Briggs is another big one. So it was really interesting to kind of think how many of those really incredible books he was kind of responsible for bringing to the UK audience. And then after his talk, by this point in the day, it's kind of late afternoon, I was really quite sleep deprived. So I was just kind of, but I was happy. I was enjoying myself because my bit was over and I could kind of relax. The final speaker was Emil Ferris from the US, whose graphic novel, My Favourite Thing is Monsters, was one of the most acclaimed books of last year. And she talked to us from Chicago, I think, on Skype. And she was brilliant. Like, all of the speakers were really different from each other. She was kind of really lovely with the students. They had to kind of go up to the front of the stage and sit in front of a laptop and talk to her kind of one by one, and then her replies were projected onto a big screen so that we could all see, and she was just so encouraging of them. So I was due to get back to London at 10:30 at night, and then I would still have to get to where I live, so I knew it was going to be quite a late night. And I'd had this plan to try and draw my Patreon comic. I do a monthly Patreon comic, use the journey time that day to do that. And I ended up doing some work on my book instead on the way to Plymouth. So on the way back, I was so exhausted on the train. I thought, there's no way I'm going to draw a comic at this point. I'm so tired. But I ended up buying a small bottle of wine. And by the time I had drunk that and kind of warmed up again on the train, I actually did get quite a bit done just drawing on my iPad. I planned out a whole comic and then started to kind of draw it up. And then got back to London, as I said, at 10:30, got back to my house at maybe 20 past 11 or something. So I was absolutely shattered, but it was just a lovely day. And thanks to everyone from Plymouth University, you were all brilliant. Hi there, so I'm currently on a train on my way to Plymouth for the Plymouth University illustration talk that I'm doing today. It's been quite a day so far. I got up at 5:15 because I took a taxi to Paddington Station. They had to avoid the congestion charge, so they encouraged me to go quite early, which is actually fine for me. I like being early for trains. So I spent a bit of time in the station, watched the finale of the UK RuPaul's Drag Race, and then my train was quite late leaving Paddington in the end, but hopefully they've decided to skip a few stops to get us there on time, so hopefully that'll be fine. And I hope to film a bit of this event and then update you later on how it goes. The weather's quite strange today, pouring with rain when I first got up just after 5 in the morning. And then it got quite sunny, and now that I'm heading towards the southwest of the country, it's so rainy, it's so dark, it's almost like it's gone nighttime again. I managed to spot some deer and pheasant from the train so far, which is quite nice.
with a big pen, which was insane. Initially when I sold the idea of the book, you chose right when we were talking just now?
Yeah.
I thought it was beautiful.
Thank you.
And I asked for, here I'm getting it. I hear I'm getting a copy and maybe even a t-shirt. Should I be bragging about my swag?
That's nice. I hope I'm getting a copy. My other news is that I finally finished drawing the rough pages for my graphic novel that's coming out next year. I'm really happy about that because it's my least favourite stage of the process. There's just loads of staring at a sort of blank page and trying to figure out how it's going to work, and then drawing these awful looking kind of rough sketches, which I don't find fun at all. I find the stage of being able to draw the final art more enjoyable because you have something really nice taking shape. So yeah, I'm at that stage now. I've drawn 2 pages in final art so far, and now I just have to work through the other 158, 157, 158-ish. So that's what I'll be doing over the next 6 months or so. But it felt like a really nice milestone to have got to the end of those roughs, which I was really finding boring, and it was really dragging. So now I can sit back and enjoy the bit that I really like. I had one more event this year where I was going to be selling my stuff, and that was Catford Comic Zine Fair. Catford's quite local to me in South London, and I didn't make it to this event last year because I think there was something that clashed, but everyone that I spoke to that went said it was just really lovely. It's a really small kind of local thing. I'm not expecting to sell huge quantities or anything, but it's just going to be a nice kind of friendly event. There'll be loads of people I know there, so I'm looking forward to that. That's in 2 days' time, so I'll take my camera and try and film some stuff there. I'm just heading out to the Catford Comic Zine Fair this morning. I have to take 2 buses to get to Catford. They're both quite short journeys, but I have to change buses. And the first bus is one of the local London buses. They always have a P in front of the number, and they're kind of small single deck buses that I always quite enjoy taking because they go all around the residential streets instead of the main roads. So they're slow but kind of nice.
To Lewisham Station.
It's hard not to be tempted by freeze.
So what I'm showing you here is some work that I've done this week on a page of final art for my graphic novel that I'm working on. You can see from this that what I do is work on a sort of grey, off-white background, which allows me to then, that adds a mid-tone to my pages, and I then do line art, and then I can add shadows and highlights on top of that. I've got white sort of space between each panel that is on a higher layer, so I can draw and shade the panels, and that stays hidden by the white layer on top. Here I'm starting to add some shadow and highlight. When it looks like it's flickering, that's me sort of turning layers on and off to kind of assess what's happening, what layer I'm working on or what's going on underneath. Here I'm tidying up the speech bubbles and the speech bubble tails, just because what I had originally was rough, and I'm just kind of making them look a bit neater. So the order of work is I draw my panels first, add the text and speech bubbles so that I know how to place the drawings on the page, and then that's kind of there all the way through the rough to the final stage. Then I do the rough artwork on one layer, turn the opacity of that layer right down when I go on to final art so that I can kind of trace over the top of it on a new layer. And when I do the final art, I do start with the line art, but then that is something I continue to tweak and adjust as I add the shadows and highlights as well. And now working on finishing the two long panels across the centre of the page. And in a minute I'll show you the finished page. I've got a finished knitting project I can show you. I was going to show this in the last episode because I actually finished this on my trip to Harrogate for the Thought Bubble Festival, but I forgot to film the bit talking about the socks, and then I started editing the episode and then couldn't be bothered to go and re-record an extra little section. So here are the socks that I finished. These socks are called the Pebbles and Pathways pattern, and they're by Mars, who's an American designer who goes by the name of Hey Brownberry on social media and on Ravelry, I think. And it's a really simple kind of cable pattern with a little bit of garter stitch in the middle, and it's quite simple, but it was perfect. It was actually suggested to me by my friend Katie, who's a knitting sort of expert, as a good one for me to take to Thought Bubble to knit behind my table, because it's quite simple, but it is still interesting with the cable there. But there's no point where you are going to get confused about what stage you're at. You don't need to keep referring to a chart or anything. And once you're in the swing of it, it's quite straightforward. So I sat behind my table at Thought Bubble knitting these and finished them on the train home. I'm going to meet some comics friends for a drink in Soho. I'll show you the lights, the Christmas lights on Regent Street, because they're quite pretty at the moment.